I always believed I knew everything about my father. He was the kind of man who rarely spoke about himself. Instead of telling stories about his younger days, he preferred listening to mine. Every evening he would sit on the old wooden porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset with a peaceful smile on his face. Whenever I asked about his childhood or the years before he married my mother, he would simply smile and say, "The past is a beautiful place to visit, but not a place to live." At the time, I thought he was simply a private person. I never imagined he was carrying a secret so powerful that it would survive 3 decades. When he passed away at the age of 72, it felt as though the world had stopped moving. The funeral was filled with people whose lives he had quietly touched. Neighbors spoke about how he had repaired their broken fences without asking for anything in return. Former coworkers remembered his kindness and honesty. Children from our neighborhood cried because they had lost the gentle old man who always carried candy in his pocket. As everyone shared stories about him, I realized something surprising. No one knew very much about the first half of his life. It was as if he had appeared one day, already the wonderful man everyone admired. After the funeral, our family slowly returned to their normal routines, but I couldn't. Every room inside our house reminded me of him. His favorite cardigan still hung behind the bedroom door. His reading glasses rested beside his unfinished crossword puzzle. His old radio remained on the kitchen shelf, silent for the first time in years. The house felt empty, yet somehow it also felt like it was trying to tell me something. A week later, I decided to clean the attic. It had always been my father's favorite place. He spent hours there fixing old furniture, organizing boxes, and keeping memories that nobody else seemed interested in. Dust floated through the narrow beams of sunlight as I climbed the wooden stairs. Every shelf held pieces of our family's history: photo albums, faded Christmas decorations, old toys from my childhood, and stacks of books that smelled of age and cedar wood. For hours I sorted through everything. Nothing seemed unusual. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed something strange beneath an old cabinet. One of the wooden floorboards looked newer than the others. Curious, I knelt down and gently lifted it. Hidden beneath was a small cedar box wrapped carefully in faded blue cloth. I frowned. In all my years living in this house, I had never seen it before. The box was locked. Someone had wanted to make absolutely certain it remained hidden. I searched the attic until I found one of my father's old toolboxes. Inside, among rusty nails and tiny screwdrivers, rested a small brass key attached to a worn leather tag. Only one word was written on it: hope. A chill ran down my spine. With trembling hands, I carried the key back to the cedar box. The lock clicked open with surprising ease. Inside lay a single envelope tied neatly with an ivory ribbon that had yellowed with time. The paper looked delicate, as though even touching it too roughly might cause it to crumble. Across the front, in my father's neat handwriting, were the words, "For my daughter, please read this only after I'm gone." For several long moments I simply stared. My father had planned this. He had hidden these words, knowing one day I would be standing exactly where I was now. I slowly untied the ribbon and unfolded the fragile pages. His handwriting instantly brought tears to my eyes. "My dearest Emily," on the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am no longer beside you. There is something I have carried in silence for 30 years. I kept this secret not because I was ashamed, but because I never wanted it to hurt the people I loved." I took a deep breath before continuing. "Before I became your father, before I met your mother, there was someone who completely changed my life." A small photograph slipped from between the pages and landed softly in my lap. I picked it up. The young woman in the picture was breathtakingly beautiful. She stood beside a sparkling lake wearing a flowing white dress. Her long chestnut hair danced in the breeze, and her bright green eyes seemed full of hope. But it was her smile that caught my attention. It wasn't simply beautiful. It was filled with happiness so genuine that it almost felt alive, even after all these years. On the back of the photograph, my father had written in careful ink, "The only woman who ever made my heart feel completely at home." My chest tightened. I looked back at the letter. Her name was Elena. We dreamed of spending our lives together. We planned to marry, travel the world, and build a small house by the sea. But life had different plans for us. As I continued reading, the heartbreaking truth slowly unfolded. Their families had forbidden them from being together because they came from different worlds. Every letter they wrote had been intercepted before reaching the other. Each believed they had been abandoned. Every promise they made slowly disappeared beneath years of painful silence. Eventually, my father accepted that he would never see Elena again. Years later, he met my mother. "Your mother was a wonderful woman," and he wrote. "She gave me kindness, friendship, and a beautiful family. I loved her with all the respect she deserved, and I will always be grateful for the life we shared. But there was one promise I could never break." Tears blurred my vision. A small part of my heart never stopped hoping Elena was happy. If she is still alive, please tell her that I never forgot. Tell her that not a single birthday passed without wondering where she was. Tell her that every sunset reminded me of the lake where we promised to love each other forever. At the very bottom of the letter was a name, an address, and one final sentence. Perhaps fate separated us then, but maybe it has chosen you to finish the story we never could. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I barely slept the entire night. My father's letter rested on the bedside table beside Elena's faded photograph. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept wondering about the woman with the warm smile. Was she still alive? Had she found happiness? Had she ever stopped waiting for the man she loved? I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my bag. If there was even the smallest chance I could fulfill my father's final wish, I couldn't ignore it. The drive took nearly 6 hours. The highway slowly gave way to narrow country roads lined with tall trees and colorful wildflowers. As I drove closer to the address written on the envelope, the air became cooler, carrying the fresh scent of the nearby ocean. Eventually, my GPS announced that I had arrived. In front of me stood a small white cottage overlooking the sea. It looked peaceful, almost untouched by time. White roses climbed along the wooden porch and colorful flower pots surrounded the entrance. Wind chimes gently danced in the breeze, creating a soft melody that somehow made the place feel welcoming. For a moment, I couldn't move. This was where the woman from my father's memories had lived all these years. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. A few seconds later, it slowly opened. An elderly woman stood before me. Time had filled her hair with silver, and gentle lines surrounded her eyes, but there was no mistaking those beautiful emerald eyes. They were exactly the same as in the photograph. "Can I help you?" she asked kindly. My throat tightened. Are you Elena?" She nodded with a puzzled smile. "Yes." Without saying another word, I reached into my bag and carefully handed her the photograph. The moment her eyes landed on it, everything changed. Her smile disappeared. Her hands began to tremble so badly that I thought she might drop the picture. She stared at it as though she had just seen a ghost. Slowly, tears filled her eyes. Then I handed her my father's letter. The instant she recognized his handwriting, she covered her mouth with one hand. "Oh," she whispered, barely able to breathe. She traced the ink gently with her fingertips before tears began streaming down her face. "I've waited so long to see this handwriting again." Neither of us spoke. The silence between us carried 30 years of unanswered questions. She stepped aside and quietly invited me inside. The cottage was warm and filled with the comforting scent of fresh tea and lavender. Sunlight poured through the large windows overlooking the ocean. As I looked around, I noticed paintings covering nearly every wall. Beautiful sunsets, peaceful lakes, snow-covered mountains, fields of blooming flowers. At first they seemed like ordinary landscapes. Then I noticed him. In one painting, a young man stood fishing beside a quiet lake. In another, he sat beneath a large oak tree reading a book. In another, he laughed while flying a kite on the beach. Every face belonged to my father. Sometimes he appeared clearly. Sometimes only his silhouette stood in the distance. It felt as though Elena had spent decades painting memories she refused to let disappear. "You painted all these?" I asked softly. She smiled through her tears. I couldn't remember his voice anymore. Her eyes remained fixed on one painting, but I was terrified of forgetting his face. My heart broke. She carefully unfolded my father's letter and sat beside the window. For several minutes, the room remained completely silent, except for the sound of the waves outside. She read every word slowly. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she simply closed her eyes and held the paper against her heart. When she finally reached the last sentence, she let out a quiet sob. "He never forgot." Her voice shook. I spent 30 years believing he had stopped loving me. I gently shook my head. "He never did. He carried your photograph until the day he died. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. She slowly stood and walked toward an old wooden cabinet tucked into the corner of the room. After unlocking it with a small key hanging around her neck, she removed a weathered wooden box. Inside were dozens of envelopes tied together with faded blue ribbon. Some looked almost as old as my father's letter. I wrote to him every month, she whispered. For 5 years. She carefully handed me the bundle. Every envelope had my father's name written across the front. None had ever been opened. My father never mailed them. She looked down at her hands. He believed our families would never accept us. Every time I finished another letter, he promised he would send it. She paused. I discovered years later that he had hidden every single one. A tear landed on the top envelope. I thought your father simply stopped writing because he no longer loved me. I reached into my bag and showed her the final page of my father's letter. His final words were simple. Please tell Elena that not one birthday passed without wondering if she was smiling somewhere beneath the same sky. Elena closed her eyes. Then for the first time since I arrived, she smiled. It was a quiet, gentle smile filled with sadness and relief. I knew it, she whispered. My heart always told me something had happened. She looked out toward the ocean. You know, we planned everything. She laughed softly through her tears. We wanted a tiny house by the sea. She pointed toward the beach below. Right there. We even argued over what color we'd paint the front door. I smiled. What color did you choose? She laughed again. I wanted blue. He wanted green. Her laughter slowly faded into silence. We were so young. She opened another drawer and carefully removed a small leather journal. The cover was worn from years of use. I've written about him every year since. A week passed, but I couldn't stop thinking about Elena. Every evening after work, I found myself reading another chapter from the leather journal she had given me. It wasn't just a diary. It was a lifetime of love preserved on paper. Every page revealed another memory of my father, another dream they had once shared, another quiet hope that somehow, somewhere, he was living a happy life. Some entries made me smile. Others left me in tears. One page described how they had spent an entire afternoon feeding ducks by a small lake, laughing because my father insisted the ducks liked him more. Another told the story of how he nervously tried to bake her a birthday cake, only to burn it so badly that they ended up eating bread and strawberries instead. They weren't extraordinary moments. They were ordinary moments made unforgettable because they had shared them together. As I reached the final pages of the journal, I found an entry written only a few months earlier. If I never see him again in this lifetime, I hope someone tells him that I never stopped loving him. I don't want him to carry guilt. I only want him to know that loving him was the greatest blessing of my life. I couldn't hold back my tears. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I called Elena the next morning. When she answered, her voice sounded softer than before, almost peaceful. I was wondering if you'd like to visit my father. There was a long silence. Finally, she whispered, I've dreamed about that day for 30 years. 2 days later, we met at the cemetery. The morning sky was covered with soft gray clouds and a cool breeze carried the scent of fresh rain. Birds sang quietly from the nearby trees, while rows of white flowers surrounded the peaceful hillside where my father rested. I arrived first. A few minutes later, I saw Elena slowly walking toward me. She wore a simple cream-colored dress beneath a light gray coat. In her hand, she carried a bouquet of fresh white roses tied together with a pale blue ribbon, the same color as the ribbon that had wrapped my father's hidden letter. Neither of us spoke. Words somehow felt too small for a moment that had taken 3 decades to arrive. Together, we walked toward my father's grave. When Elena saw his name carved into the stone, she stopped. Her knees nearly gave way. She reached out with trembling fingers and gently traced each letter of his name as if she were afraid it might disappear. Then, without another word, she knelt beside the grave. The white roses rested gently against the headstone. Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. I finally found you, she whispered. I kept looking for you in every sunset. Her voice broke. I just found you too late. The wind gently moved through the trees. For a moment, everything became completely still. It almost felt as though time itself had stopped to listen. Elena placed her hand on the cool stone and closed her eyes. I was so angry with you for so many years, she admitted softly. I thought you had forgotten me. She smiled sadly through her tears. I should have known better. I should have trusted the man who promised he'd never leave my heart. I carefully removed my father's letter from my bag and placed it beside the roses. Then I opened Elena's journal to its final page. My voice trembled as I began reading aloud. If someday our paths never cross again, I hope life is kind to you. I hope you found laughter when I couldn't make you laugh. I hope someone reminded you to eat when you worked too hard. I hope someone loved you enough to make you smile every morning. And if heaven allows souls to remember, I hope we'll finish our walk beside the lake that we never got to finish. Neither of us could stop crying. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was comforting. It was the silence of two hearts finally finding peace. After a while, Elena reached into her handbag and removed a small envelope. The paper looked old, carefully protected for many years. I wrote this letter 29 years ago, she said. I carried it everywhere, hoping I'd someday find him. She smiled gently. I think it's finally reached its destination. She handed it to me. Together, we tucked the letter beneath the bouquet of white roses. A gentle breeze lifted the corner of the envelope before settling it back into place. Elena looked toward the sky. Goodbye, my love, she whispered. But only for now. She stood quietly beside me, wiping away her tears. You know, she said with a small smile, your father used to tell me that every love story deserved an ending. I looked at the flowers resting against the headstone. Maybe this is theirs. She shook her head gently. No, this isn't the end. I looked at her, confused. She smiled through tears that now carried more gratitude than sorrow. The end happened 30 years ago. She placed her hand over her heart. This is the healing. Before we left, I noticed something carved into the back of my father's headstone that I had never seen before. It was hidden beneath a layer of moss. I carefully brushed it away. The inscription was only one sentence. Some promises take a lifetime to keep. Neither of us spoke. We didn't have to. As we walked away together, the clouds slowly parted, allowing warm golden sunlight to shine across the cemetery. The light rested gently over my father's grave, the white roses and the two letters that had finally been reunited after 30 long years. In that moment, I understood why my father had hidden the letter instead of destroying it. He wasn't holding on to the past because he couldn't move forward. He was protecting a promise until the day someone could finally fulfill it. His final gift wasn't just the truth. It was the chance to heal a heart that had quietly carried love through an entire lifetime. Driving home with Elena beside me, I realized that love isn't measured by how long two people are together. Sometimes it's measured by how faithfully they remember each other, even when life forces them apart. My father and Elena never got the future they dreamed of. They never built the little house by the sea. They never grew old sitting together on the porch. But their love had survived distance, silence,